I'm Fred Kang, a resident of Goodwin House Alexandria and a member of the Speakers Forum that is sponsoring this event. I'm also honored to be a friend of Steve Case and to extend to him a warm aloha and welcome to our Goodwin Living Ohana. Ohana in Hawaiian means family. Steve and I are both sons of Hawaii, and in our tradition, we welcome our honored guest, Liebreich, Teresa, as the Associate Executive Director of Goodwin House Alexandria. Would you please do the honor? Mr. Case is one of America's best known and most accomplished entrepreneurs and a pioneer in making the internet part of everyday life. He is the chairman and CEO of Revolution LLC, a Washington, D.C. based investment firm he co-founded in 2005, where he partners with visionary entrepreneurs to build to last new businesses. Steve's entrepreneurial career began in 1985 when he co-founded America Online, AOL. Under Steve's leadership, AOL became the world's largest and most valuable internet company, driving worldwide adoption of a medium that has transformed business and society. AOL was the first internet company to go public and among the best performing stocks in the 1990s, delivering a whopping 11,616% return to shareholders. At the helm, he ensured that AOL led the industry on issues such as making the internet a safe place for children, bridging the digital divide, and investing in online philanthropy. In 2000, Steve negotiated the largest merger in business history, bringing together AOL and Time Warner in a transaction that gave AOL stockholders a majority stake in the combined company. Steve's passion for helping entrepreneurs remains his driving force. He was the founding chair of the Startup America Partnership, an effort launched at the White House to accelerate high-growth entrepreneurship throughout the nation. You know, when I was a colonel way back when in the Air Force, I had a 3-star general, and my job was to hand him the papers, his speech. It was not. It wasn't stapled. The thing on the floor. And he said, "What do I do?" And I said, "Sir, admin." Steve is also a presidential ambassador for global entrepreneurship. Was the founding co-chair of the National Advisory Council on Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and a member of President Obama's Council on Jobs and Competitiveness. Steve is a leading voice in shaping government policy on issues related to entrepreneurship, working in a bipartisan approach to advance public policies and expand access to capital and talent. In 2010, Steve and his wife, Jean Case, joined the Giving Pledge and publicly reaffirmed their commitment to give away the majority of their wealth to philanthropic causes. Steve, we are very grateful to have you as our guest and look forward to an insightful evening with you. And so with that, Rob, over to you.
And just wanted to provide additional context to this group of residents and members and team members. We're so grateful for your time. Can you give us a little bit additional context to your connection to communities like this?
Well, first of all, it's great to be here and great to see you again, present some other familiar faces. My parents both passed away. Thankfully, my mom was 89, my dad was 93. Lived in a place in Hawaii, quite similar to this, and really enjoyed their last years there. I really loved the different activities. I think my mom or my dad, the different activities that you could do. It also benefited when they get older, had some health challenges, to be able to kind of stay in the complex and have some place to go. So I heard about Goodwin House and what you were doing here. It resonates based on my own experience.
Great. Thanks for connecting those dots. Growing up in Hawaii, any values from your youth that you really look back at and say, okay, that really propelled me forward? Those are the elements that have me creating such an amazing organization.
It's always hard with these things. In retrospect, you look back and you see certain things that maybe at the time you don't fully understand or fully appreciate. That's sort of my story as well. I learned a lot of things, obviously, from my parents about hard work and stick-to-itiveness. So, perseverance, which is one of the core traits of entrepreneurship. And most things are a struggle. A lot of things don't work, and you just have to, if you get knocked down, kind of get back up. And so that was one aspect to it. Also, a certain humility, not really bragging too much about what you did, even on the philanthropy side. It's sort of odd, but obviously the resources we got was from the internet. And when we launched the Case Foundation over 25 years ago, we didn't have a website. So we didn't want to promote what we were doing. We just wanted to do it a little bit more quietly. And after a few years, people said, appreciate that, but it actually would be helpful to actually tell people what you're doing. Maybe that'll inspire other people to support us as well. So I think the humility aspect is important. I think also just recognizing, growing up in Hawaii, there's a certain, sometimes getting things right just takes some time. You have to bring people along, and sometimes trying to force it or rush it, end up not getting what you are trying to get done, but maybe even losing ground. And that perspective was helpful. Even a little bit in terms of things like surfing the waves. Sometimes just waiting, but you have to be patient, and you see the right way, and you say that's the one you have to go on. Those were some of the things that I remember from growing up that I think ended up kind of helping me in my career. Now, in fairness, when I was growing up, I had my parents had a rather unusual situation, which is they were told that they could not have children, so they adopted my sister Karen. And when they adopted my sister Karen, my mom was pregnant with my brother Dan, even though they were told they couldn't be pregnant. So, and then 13 months later, I popped into the world. So they ended up having 3 children in 18 months. And then a fourth, about 4 years later. So I'm sure for them it was bedlam, having raised 5 kids and now having 4 grandkids. I can only imagine kind of the 3 and 18 months. But it was good for me because I was able to, kind of like a lot of middle children, just kind of quietly do my own thing and just good enough grades to not get in trouble. And just, I was able to be, a little bit more independent and do some of the things I wanted to do on the entrepreneurial front. So those are some of the things that are takeaways.
I love that. That humbleness that you talked about obviously has been really important. And your philanthropy has been tremendously important, seemingly all your life, not just now. As you look at the trends that are happening, and I know you study demographics like all people, and know what's happening with the aging community. We're doubling the number of older adults, which is awesome. We love that. But we're also not having a whole lot of babies, and we don't have a whole lot of workforce. As you look at philanthropy and the aging society that we're in, really the world's in, what roles do you see for philanthropists over the next decade as it relates to aging?
Well, there's a lot of things. Obviously, there's a role for philanthropy, there's a role for business, there's a role for government. All these things we learned is it requires sort of a multifaceted approach. The things that really, really move and have significant impact require that kind of cross-sector collaboration. So philanthropy is really good at trying new ideas, testing out new things, trying to move things forward, and then trying to scale some of the things that are showing promise. Kind of like a little bit of a laboratory of experimentation. Government's good at really providing significant scale and impact, sometimes taking some of the ideas that have been tested in the nonprofit sector and really scaling them in a much more significant way. Obviously, the dollars the government spends are dramatically more than the entire philanthropic sector. So when they get behind something, it really can have significant impact. And the business world is obviously very effective in setting priorities, allocating capital, innovating more than nonprofits often do, and for sure more than government often does. And so all of them, I think, need to contribute on any topic, whether it be aging or other topics. And of course, on the government side, there are a lot of issues around healthcare policy and budget issues and so forth that people are trying to deal with, and that's going to be a key part of it. A lot of philanthropists are doing things that I think are pretty interesting, innovative in the space. And there are a ton of companies that are now focused on aging, even some venture capital funds exclusively focused on aging. I was speaking at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas in January, a big event, 100,000 people, and there was a really large booth from AARP, which has created a venture arm, and they've invested in 30 or 40 young startup companies that are all doing things related to aging. So that gets the benefit of the entrepreneurs focusing on it, while philanthropists are focusing on it, and government is focusing on it. Well, at the core to me, I'm no expert in healthcare, but it's 20% of the economy. So it's a really big thing. And we just need to do a better job. I'm sure your own personal experiences would suggest this. Healthcare is still, probably better at Goodwin House, but is generally not that convenient, generally too expensive. You can debate over paid, but too expensive. And even the outcomes often are not what they should be. And that just requires, I think, significant innovation to really try to deal with all of those. How do you make it more convenient? How do you make it more affordable? How do you make it more effective? And that's required innovation, I think, across all those sectors.
When you think about that innovation framework and some of the inefficiencies in the healthcare system, just thinking about your background and so many of myself included, I'm sure you as well, you probably have multiple doctors that don't talk to each other, or their electronic health records don't talk to each other. It creates a lot of inefficiencies, and sometimes mistakes happen because of those inefficiencies as well. Any wisdom or any view on how the tech sector or the government otherwise can come together and
it's been a challenge for a couple of decades or longer in terms of some of the issues, electronic medical records. I think one story, we helped start a company over 50 years ago focused on innovation in healthcare and backed a number of different ideas. And one was kind of driven, animated by Colin Powell, who was a board member in that company. And it drove him crazy that when he traveled, he couldn't get, he was a little spoiled because in the military, they do have electronic medical records, private notice that actually do travel pretty seamlessly. Not perfect, needs some updating, but there is that. And so when he was going to any, military related facility, he was in pretty good shape, but if he was traveling somewhere else, he happened to be, I remember one time he told me in Colorado for a conference, and had some issue, I can't remember what it was, middle of the night, had to go to the hospital, and none of that was accessible. And he was like, this is crazy. So that's one of the many examples. That's getting better. Electronic medical records are getting better, and it's tricky because of, there's some of the issues around access are because of the technology hasn't been smart, but sometimes the institutions aren't good at sharing, and sometimes, in fact, many times, concerns about privacy. The HIPAA rules do limit your ability to bring things together. So it's not an easy problem to solve, but clearly we need to solve it.
Yeah. I was trying to figure out if there are countries out there that have come up with a better solution yet.
Well, there's some that are arguing they have better solutions, including how they handle payment of healthcare and so forth. So I think, frankly, the data in the United States is not great. We do spend more on healthcare than most other countries, and the outcomes are no better, in some cases worse than other countries. So it's not like we have it figured out. We probably could learn from how they're doing.
Yeah. So I was also just reading about a gentleman who's 85 and is working on his 6th startup company. The last 5 have all been sold to Fortune 500 organizations. Sort of curious what 85 looks like for you when you look out.
Well, I'm just documenting this summer. In August, I turned 65, which I know for somebody it doesn't seem like much, but when I started day one, I'm like 25, so this feels like a leap. I'm trying to adjust to this, so I don't know. None of us know, kind of what we'll be doing later. I hope I'm not sure I'm starting companies at 85, but hopefully I can play some role in inspiring others to start companies and take on some of these, difficult societal challenges and bring some fresh thinking. But we'll see.
Okay. And just to be clear, Fred nor anyone involved knew that you were turning 65 and reached out to you.
Yeah, I did feel before we here, I was getting a little Goodwin tour. I was like, are they trying to sell me? Is it really please speak, but really kind of a clever sales tactic?
Yeah. Our favorite song is Hotel California. In terms of technology and how things are progressing, artificial intelligence is a big deal, has been a big deal for many years, but certainly it has hit the limelight lately. You're the founder of AOL, and you see this new force coming through. What do you think? What's your opinion, positive or negative or otherwise?
It's like most technologies. It's a mix. And as you suggested, AI, artificial intelligence, is really not new. It's been in developing for 50 years. What's new is in the last 6 months, 9 months, it's really caught on in terms of being, having broad consumer appeal, particularly because one company, OpenAI, launched something called ChatGPT, and there were 100 million people using ChatGPT in the first couple months. So it was this massive overnight success, and it worked pretty well. And it kind of felt like magic. You type in something, get something back, and think, wow, that's pretty good. That got people thinking, essentially triggered what's now an arms race between the big tech companies, Google, Microsoft, Facebook. All these people are kind of focusing on it. Launched a gold rush in terms of venture capital, or billions and billions of dollars have invested in the last 6 months in AI. And so the innovation is going to be extraordinary, including, by the way, in healthcare. We backed a company a number of years ago that use AI and other technologies to basically better diagnose disease. If you're diagnosed with cancer or other kinds of things, it's still not as precise as it should be. And so they're using AI and genomics and aggregating data from I think now 80% of the National Cancer Institute hospitals to create this massive data set. And basically, that's an example of AI saving lives.
Right.
And there are many other examples of AI that are able to do things in terms of improving how people learn, maybe helping the education sector. We even backed a company recently that uses AI on farms to basically identify, as a pattern recognition, they're using AI and then lasers, and identifies weeds, and then the lasers zap the weeds. So it's a really effective way to for large farms. So that's another example. So whether it's staying healthy or learning or eating, pretty fundamental things are being now reimagined. And there are other technologies as well. It's usually not any one thing. It's sort of a convergence of many things. But for sure, AI has got enormous potential to help in lots of different ways. There are some negatives, there are some concerns, and that is getting more and more attention. I was on a call this morning. I'm on the board of something called TechNet that works with Congress on policy related to technology, and not surprisingly, AI is a big topic. And so, how do you get the benefits of these technologies while hedging against some of the risks, and the risks around privacy, and risk around cybersecurity, and risk around job displacement, and there's a bunch of things that a much longer list. So it's like anything, including my experience with the internet. We knew it had the potential to change the world. We knew it had the potential to change how we communicated, how we got information, how we bought products, a bunch of different things. But we also knew, this goes back 40 years ago, that there could be some downsides. And so the challenge, if you're innovating, is to try to figure out, and it's part of the responsibility is on the entrepreneurs, the private sector, but also obviously a responsibility on government. How do you figure out ways to strike the right balance so you get as much of the positive benefit as you can, but you also mitigate, kind of hedge some of the risks on the downside. And we're in that discussion now. The positive is, unlike most other things, And certainly in this country and even in Europe this last week, some legislation was proposed, essentially the AI law, they're calling it. And it's still take a little time to finalize, but they and Congress are on it. You know, just yesterday, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer laid out a framework around AI. There's a lot of discussion about it, and there's a lot of recognition that the policymakers, in this case in Congress, it's confusing. It's hard to understand this, and so they need to be educated around what it is and how it works, and some of the benefits, but also some of the risks, so they can think about the right policy and strike that right balance. If you over-regulate, it likely will chill the innovation at a time where there's a global battle with AI, other things, particularly with China. If you don't do anything, likely some bad things will happen. So you got to get the balance right.
Yeah, that balancing act seems really difficult for a lot of organizations to figure out. And just thinking about higher education, I think there's a lot of schools out there that are saying, well, we need to do it and help our students learn how to use it. And there's others that are saying, don't use it. We don't want you to use it. And there's this battle of, police it or really elevate it.
I had a dinner last night with 12, most of them are university presidents, but some also provosts, and some of it was around entrepreneurship on campuses, but some of it also ended up being the future education, what's going to happen in terms of the consolidation, some smaller places that aren't differentiated, kind of falling by the wayside, some big platforms emerging. One in particular, I don't know if you guys follow this, but there's one university, Arizona State University, ASU, that's now the largest university in America, the fastest growing university in America, and 8 years running rated the most innovative university in America. They now have nearly 200,000 students, half on campus in Arizona and half virtual. And what they're doing in terms of innovation education is significant. As a result, these people aren't able to make that investment, or the colleges and universities are at a risk of being left behind. So there's that conversation. But it also came into what do we do about AI, ChatGPT, and so forth. And it's a complicated issue. Obviously, nobody wants to encourage cheating and in terms of but I lean more into it's a tool that is going to become mainstream, and we should teach people how to use it and how to benefit from it, but also make sure they also understand some of the downside. It reminds me, and perhaps some of you, when the calculator came out 50 years ago, people said that's cheating. And they banned calculators from the classroom. After a few years, they said, well, that's probably not workable, and frankly, it's not that smart. And then 30, 40 years ago, with a computer, spreadsheets, Lotus 1, 2, 3, and VisiCalc, and Microsoft Excel came out, and people said, oh, that seems like it's cheating too. After a while, they said, well, it's a tool, people are going to use it. Let's teach what the tool is and how to use it. And so I'm guessing that's the way. There'll be a little bit of swirl around it, but that's the way it will be for most people in the education system over the next 5 or 10 years.
Really interesting perspective, helpful, I think, for sure. And
may I add one second. One other thing that might be of interest to some of you, particularly if you think about grandkids and things like that. There's been a movement for the last at least 10, arguably 20 years, that basically says everybody needs to understand how to code, how to write software for computers. And some, that's been super helpful. We have examples of where that's been really super empowering. But it was a little bit of a, like many things, kind of a lurch one size fits all, because not everybody, that's not going to be their thing. And so trying to push that on everybody didn't really make sense. Now there's a recognition, and you're hearing this, more in the last few months. Wait a minute. If these technologies, AI and other derivations of the technology, one thing's actually pretty good at is coding. And if all you're doing is kind of blocking and tackling rote coding, that's going to be better. Yep. So what happens is people say, what you really need is not just to do the basics, just like ChatGPT actually can write a pretty good rough draft of an article on a different topic. That's the easy part. The harder part in journalism is actually the editing, not the drafting. And that's what requires, kind of more, kind of a creative perspective. So I think what you're going to see happen in the next 10 or 20 years is more of a push towards liberal arts education, even though it's fallen largely out of favor in the last 10 or 20 years. And so knowing a little bit about a lot of things in a world that's changing is important, knowing how to integrate a lot of thoughts. So the synthesis of ideas and the communications of ideas, the critical thinking around ideas, those issues are going to become more important. And in the business world, I think some of the things that are going to really drive it are going to be creativity and collaboration and communication, again, creative thinking skills. So some of those basic skills really take the starting point, maybe that rough draft from ChatGPT, and allow you to take it to the next level. It also allows you to provide perspective on issues in terms of how should you build this product or service? How should you engage with policymakers around some of the challenges and opportunities, those sorts of things. So I think not to say coding is still not important, and for some people it's absolutely what they should be doing. But I think increasingly some of the perspective that the liberal arts thing and the basics, English, history, and philosophy, and so forth, I don't seem very useful. You need more of a skill. The most important thing is to make sure our schools are teaching our kids the things that machines can't do. Because if the machines can do it, the machines will do it. And the march of technology will result in them doing it better and better and better. So you need to teach the skills that take that as a starting point and then kind of go beyond.
Yeah, it seems like a steady diet of curiosity.
Yeah, no
is going to
question.
be critical going forward as well. I should have mentioned these questions are a culmination of residents and team members coming together. So I say that in advance of
So crowdsourced.
Yeah, they are crowdsourced. Yeah. It saved me a lot of time.
So it's kind of like you're using ChatGPT. It's just ChatGPT
I should have thought
community.
about that. So
So you're cheating.
well, I'm efficient. I'm efficient. Yeah. My son is in the audience, so I have a hard time.
He's not cheating.
Yeah.
Less than your father. Your father knows best.
But one of the questions that was brought up is dementia and the challenge with folks that have dementia, Alzheimer's in particular. We see people really need that human contact in order to be successful and really come around the care and needs there. And so technologies don't seem to be as helpful when it's hard to displace a person in that caring, tender approach. So there's going to be a lot of careers still that people can pursue that may not be technology driven.
No, it builds on exactly the last thing we were talking about. That's a perfect example of a skill that machines can't replicate. There's something about the human connection, something about the empathy that some people believe eventually artificial intelligence, other things will advance and people might be even more human-like, and maybe even down the road can be done. And there are people using versions of AI around mental health issues and so forth. So maybe that's the case. But it strikes me for quite a bit of time, that is an example of the kind of thing that you really want to be working with a person, talking to the person, interacting with a person, and not with a machine.
Yeah. Very true. We're so grateful for our team members that choose that career, certainly. And certainly we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So this question definitely is, I can channel my own father, who's an AOL account holder, and we know you sold AOL, so any tech questions are not intended for you to solve immediately.
It was amazing. I think we did that for over 20 years ago, and so I haven't been involved in AOL for a long time. But certainly when I was running AOL, and even for a while after, I would go to somebody's house for dinner.
Yeah.
I'd be chat. Then I'd come in. By the way, I have a problem with my computer. No, I didn't say I was like Mr. Fix-It. That's sort of what's that service that's offered where they...
Geek Squad.
Geek Squad. I'm not Geek Squad. First of all, I don't know how to fix it. Second of all, that's I didn't come for dinner. What are you talking about? Everybody presumes they knew more than I do.
Yeah, well, so this question might fit into that realm.
Oh, it sounds like a tough one.
Well, I was going to ask for your advice about advocacy amongst technology. And that's how I'll pose this, because one of the questions was around, as things change, sometimes they get fancier, more complicated. And there's a group of people, and maybe a growing group of people, that really want to keep it simple.
Yep.
And this might have been around the context of AOL and the changing interfaces that they're going through. But just generally, any wisdom or advice you give to a growing population of consumers who may want to seek out a simpler solution?
No question, no question. The challenge is technologists always see ways that they can add features that they're sure are going to be helpful. And for some people, they are helpful. But if you keep adding features, that creates complexity and confusion that turns off most people. And so the balancing act is to figure out how to continue to iterate, innovate, but at the same time, not add a level of complexity that is not something that's particularly helpful. And the companies that is one of the reasons Apple's been successful. They were more successful than particularly Microsoft. Microsoft tended to focused on adding more features, and the software got pretty complicated. The brilliance of Apple, particularly the perspective of Steve Jobs when he was alive, was what do you take out? It was more of an editing job, a simplifying kind of job. I think that's important. And we, like I'm sure some of you, and even my wife, we have a farm out in Warrenton, Virginia, about an hour from here, and then we have a condo in Georgetown we bought a few years ago. And like the oven in this condo is like super fancy and super expensive, but in her view, not functional. It's big, and similarly, people traveling around, staying in different hotels, like some of the showers. I need to turn on the water. Like kind of warm. So why is that so hard? And so I think that's an example of kind of things getting to the extreme, and simplification is important, and I think the great innovators are usually better editors than creators. They're focusing on what to take out to make sure the main things remain the main things.
Sounds like a key thread that you're pulling through with the discussion about AI. Needing editors. And now you're referring
and
back
simplifiers,
to, simplifiers. You have a current priority of a program called The Rise of the Rest. Can you tell us about that and the work that you're doing in that area?
Well, first of all, I'll tell you how I got to it. The Rise of the Rest is about promoting regional entrepreneurship. Allowing anybody, hopefully down the road, anybody who has an idea, wants to be an entrepreneur, no matter where they live, to have a shot at building a company. The way I got to this goes back to what Fred said in the intro. I was asked to co-chair this National Advisory Council on Innovation and Entrepreneurship over a decade ago, and then worked with President Obama on this Jobs Council. And I learned some things then that I did not know. It shocked me. Number one was that most jobs in this country, the net new jobs, do not actually come from small businesses or big businesses. They come from new businesses. Let me just kind of unpack that. So small businesses account for a ton of jobs. Restaurants, dry cleaners, you name it, a ton of jobs. Very important parts of our community. But as a sector, if you add up the entire small business sector, it's not a creator of new jobs. And the reason is if some restaurant goes out of business, somebody else probably going to take it over as a restaurant, probably employ about the same number of people. And that's true across all these other small business sectors. So it's super important, don't want to suggest otherwise. But if you're just looking at creating significant jobs in a community or in a country, that's not a big job creator. And the other one, which is also sort of surprising, is the big companies, the Fortune 500 companies, also aren't job creators. Some are. Amazon's added a lot of jobs and so forth. But while Amazon's added a lot of jobs, like Sears and Walmart and a bunch of other people have lost a lot of jobs. You add up all the job gains and the job losses, it's net, not new job. So it's really new company under 5 years. Startup, not just tech startups, by the way, it could be any kind of startup, are the big job creators. It's like, that's sort of interesting. Did not know that. The second thing was that not every startup wants or even needs investment capital, venture capital. Some are able to bootstrap their company and have success. But most of the companies, overwhelming majority of the companies that are really successful and create lots of jobs, the Amazons, the Apples, the AOLs, the Teslas, you name it, do raise venture capital. And that's a critical part, helps them get going, and also is sort of a rocket fuel that allows them to grow fast and become significant companies. And then if you look at where venture capital has been invested over the last couple of decades, 75% of venture capital in this country has been invested in 3 states: California, New York, Massachusetts. 75%. The other 47 states, Virginia, Ohio, Michigan, you name it, are, add up all 47 up is 25%. So what happens if you're an entrepreneur growing up in Alexandria, or growing up in Des Moines, or growing up in Ann Arbor, or growing up in Minneapolis, go down the list, you quickly learn that if you want to be part of that startup sector, that innovation economy, you must leave where you are and go to the coast, particularly go to Silicon Valley. So what's happened in the last couple of decades is a brain drain. And I'm sure you see it in your own families. They decided, and you might even encourage them reluctantly. You didn't necessarily want them to leave, but you thought they should leave because there'd be a better opportunity elsewhere, which then has a ripple effect, which could be kind of negative, almost a hollowing out of some of our communities. So that led to saying, well, we got to change it. We got to level the playing field. We got to get more of that venture capital to more people in more places, so more jobs are created in more places, more opportunities created in more places, and more hope is created in more places. And it's critical to drive our innovation economy, critical in my view. America is going to continue to lead the way as the most innovative entrepreneurial nation. And oh, by the way, it's also probably critical if we have any hope of bridging what is now a big political divide, which divides, as you all know, in lots of different ways. But one is a divide over opportunity, where some people in some places are doing really well, and a lot of people, a lot of places are feeling left out and left behind. So we started this effort with bus trips and investment funds, and we now invested in over 200 companies in 100 different cities, 38 different states, proving the point that companies can start and scale anywhere, generate great investment returns while also having really positive impacts in those communities. People are now paying a little bit more attention. More capital is now starting to flow to these cities. Last decade, since we started, 1,400 new venture firms have started in what we call these rise of the rest cities. Even the pandemic, hate to say it, because obviously there were a lot of tragic aspects to it. I'm sure all of you were dealing with it directly and personally. But one of the positives, if you're looking for a silver lining, what's been a tragic 3 years, is that did lead some people to move home, did lead to some people to move to some other city, did lead investors on the coast to start looking at other places in the middle of the country. And even the Congress, in a bipartisan way last summer, passed some legislation called the CHIPS and Science Act, which is authorized about $10 billion to fund more regional hubs, to fund more places, so we can create essentially more versions of Silicon Valley in different parts of the country. So that's why I think it's so important to the country. It's something I'm super passionate about, that we need to make sure we're not just celebrating what happens in places like Silicon Valley, or a lot of great things in Silicon Valley, but figuring out ways to celebrate the entrepreneurs everywhere and create jobs and hope and opportunity everywhere.
Amazing data and information about where such a concentration of those companies has been, and obviously it sounds like things are changing. I am curious. The pandemic was horrible in so many ways, as you referenced, and yet leveled the field maybe from a technology standpoint. By the way,
I'll give you a little some more data if you want more data. This will trouble you even more, so maybe I shouldn't share it. Perfect. It troubles me, so I might as well share it, so it could trouble you as well. So the venture capital data around place, I talked about, 75% going to 3 states. Get this, that women are 50% of the population. Female entrepreneurs get less than 10% of venture capital, less than 10%. Black Americans, 11% of the population. Black founders, less than 1%. Latino, 18% of the population. Latino founders, less than 2%. So, first of all, I think we are, and I'm proud of it, I said it before, the most innovative entrepreneurial nation in the world. But if you look at the data, we're not doing such a good job in creating an inclusive innovation economy that brings more places and more people along. And that's what needs more attention. And thankfully, as I said, it does now have attention, including our friends down the street in Congress. And it's a bipartisan issue. A lot of things are super partisan, but this is one that does tend to unite everybody.
So you're anticipating a much more diverse group of startup organizations coming from diverse owners.
Correct. And one other, by the way, you mentioned an 85-year-old founder. My other prediction is the average age of founders of significant, iconic, billion-dollar plus, what we call unicorn companies, is going to be older 10 years from now than it is today.
So tell us more about that.
The notion of,
we're expecting a lot from you.
some of you, you got an idea. You better get on the playing field here. So here's the interesting thing to me. That right now, for the most part, when we think of entrepreneurs, celebrate entrepreneurs, in the last decade or so, they typically have been in their 20s. Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, basically leaving Harvard early, starting Facebook at 20, 21, and global sensation, billionaire by the time he's 25. There's other examples, but that's once. And good for him. But we're entering a different era of innovation. And the way I think of this, and I wrote a book called The Third Wave 7 or 8 years ago. And by the way, I should point out, because some of you may have read it, there's another book called The Third Wave, written in 1980 by the futurist Alvin Toffler, which I read when I was in college. And it inspired me to essentially start AOL. And what he was saying, and I referenced it before, that the first wave was the agricultural revolution, the second wave was the industrial revolution, the third wave was, he predicted, this is 4 decades ago, the technology revolution, computer revolution, digital revolution. The way I think about the internet, it's also 3 waves. The first wave was getting America online, getting the world online. When we started in 1985, 3% of people were online, 3%. And those 3% were online an average of 1 hour a week. 1 hour a week. So virtually nobody was online, and the few that were online virtually no time. We had to do a bunch of things, a lot of other companies had to do a bunch of things to be easier to use, more useful, more fun, more affordable, a whole bunch of things. And it went, first, that era of the internet, kind of the 80s and 90s, went from essentially nobody knew about it or cared about it to suddenly everybody was connected and couldn't live without it. The last 20 years, the second wave of the internet has been essentially building software, apps on top of the internet. You didn't have to build the infrastructure, on-ramps, modems, servers, all that stuff. It was done. Everybody was connected. So you could build on top of the internet. Facebook, Google, you name it, were basically software built on top of the internet. And that's where the Mark Zuckerbergs and many others had their success, because it really required just launching a creative idea that took off and then figuring out how to turn it into a business. In the third wave, my opinion, which we're just entering now, is sort of when the internet meets the real world. And things we talked about, like healthcare and food and agriculture and financial services and education, that's the areas that are getting the focus now. Those sectors have 2 things that are quite different than the second wave. One is it requires systems thinking, systems integration, partnerships. You want to change healthcare, it's not about an app. It's about writing the app, that's like the table stakes, and then figuring out how to get doctors and nurses to use it, and hospitals to integrate it, and health plans to pay for it, and governments to allow it. That's where the kind of rubber meets the road. So it requires a lot of partnerships, and also requires engaging on the policy regulatory side. And if you really want to have significant change in these sectors, you've got to lean into the policy side. So if partnerships are critical, then policy is critical. How do you forge partnerships, and how do you influence policy? Well, it probably helps if you understand a little bit about what you're talking about. Some understanding of healthcare, or some understanding of education, or some understanding of farming probably is helpful in giving you a certain perspective, insight, and also just credibility to establish those. And you're starting to see that. You're starting to see in these sectors like healthcare and health tech, ag tech, things like that, the founding CEOs and teams tend to be older because they need to have a perspective, be a little wiser, and be able to knock on the door of a potential partner and explain in a credible way, I understand your industry, I understand your problem, I think I can help you, I have an opportunity for you. And that's not to say there won't still be some of the Mark Zuckerberg dorm room startups, but overwhelmingly, I think it will end up being people that are, kind of older and wiser. So, game on. It's your opportunity.
And you already have better than dorm rooms, right? So
Yeah,
you already.
maybe I need a little startup incubator here. We'll turn this conference room into.
It's a great idea, actually. I've been hoping that we could do something like that. Our home office is moving to a community across the street in the fall, and we're leaving a lot of space. I think an incubator for our residents and team members would be fantastic.
I always do the art thing, and
Yeah.
art studio. That looked pretty nice. Just a little startup studio.
Yeah, we got talent. We got talent. All right, you'll have to advise us on the best way to make that work. You talk about these partnerships and really trying to lever them for the best of this current third wave for the internet. One of the topics you've been seemingly very passionate about has been the immigration discussion. And so I think, well, gosh, we'll just put those ingredients together, Steve, and have these partnerships, and we'll have a wonderful immigration approach.
So I came tonight, before here, I was speaking at an event in DC on this topic, trying to figure out how to jumpstart an effort around immigration reform. Now let me first set the stage. I think as you all know, immigration is really complicated and many facets to it. And some things are really quite emotional in terms of how do we make sure we secure the border, and how do we deal with dreamers and their kids, and there's some really complicated issues. And I don't want to diminish those issues or the complications around those issues, the subtleties around those issues. But the part that concerns me the most, and actually really concerns me, if we lose our lead as the most innovative entrepreneurial nation, it will because, in my opinion, that we went from being a magnet for talent from all over the world that wanted to come to America and believed in America and started companies that help innovate in America and create jobs in America. 40% of the Fortune 500 are immigrants or children of immigrants. 50% of Silicon Valley companies are immigrants or children of immigrants. So, and it's pretty clear, all the data says these are job makers, not job takers. They're building companies that are creating jobs. And oh, by the way, not just creating jobs in those companies, but more broadly in those communities. And we saw this with AOL. We expanded and started in Tyson's Corridor and kept growing. At one point, we had 10,000 employees. It transformed when we moved out near Dulles Airport. It transformed a lot of that area in Loudoun County. Houses were being built, schools were being built, restaurants were being built. So there are jobs for construction workers, jobs for teachers across the board. And so there's a ripple effect. There's at least 5 jobs in the community that have nothing to do with the jobs in the companies. It's this flywheel effect. And so part of the story of America is the story around immigrants who come here and build here. And that's why, at least part of why, we're the leader that we are today. And we have made it harder come. We have made it harder to stay. A lot of people who wanted to stay and start companies here are forced to leave and are building those companies in other places and getting particularly intense because we have, as I'm sure you're all watching, a pretty significant global battle with China around innovation, AI, robotics, other things, and some things they're actually in the lead on some of those things. And if we're not going to continue to be kind of as a kind of a welcome mat for the best and the brightest who want to come here and then get PhDs and other things and then stay here, it's going to be a real problem. Yeah, I think we will lose that. That we already have started to lose it. If you look at the number of people getting PhDs here down versus 10 years ago. The number of people staying, if they do get PhDs, is down quite a bit, mostly because they aren't allowed to stay. And so it's a big issue, complicated issue. I'm sure everybody has different views on it and strong feelings on it. But on the core issue of essentially immigrants that have the potential to be entrepreneurs or part of entrepreneurial companies, we are really shooting ourselves in the foot in terms of losing some of this lead, this edge. I've been particularly focused on this because for the last more than a decade I'm on the board of Regents of the Smithsonian, which is probably now we have 20 museums involved, and we're gearing up in 3 years, almost exactly 3 years, for America's 250th birthday. And I remind people that 250 years ago, or 247 years ago, America itself was a startup. It was just an idea. And oh, by the way, like most startups, it almost failed. And oh, by the way, most people around the world thought it would fail. But somehow, some way, we stumbled through that like entrepreneurs do. And now, 247 years later, America is America. And as I said, talking about how the top were the three ways, part of that is because after that struggling startup, somehow we led the way in that agricultural revolution. Somehow we pivoted, moved from farms to factories, and we led the way in the Industrial Revolution. And somehow, once again, we pivoted and we led the way in the technology revolution. Not guaranteed that we'll continue to lead the way. And what do we do to maximize the likelihood that we can? There's a bunch of things that go into this. I'm actually working on a national entrepreneurship strategy with the Commerce Department, and want to build bipartisan support for it in the fall. Many facets to it, but this issue of immigration, which should be viewed more as talent recruiting, to make sure our country remains the most innovative country in the world. We just need to figure out some path forward in terms of getting Congress to focus on that and get something done. Otherwise, as I said at the beginning, the history books are written 50 years ago on America's story, and it ends up going in decline. I'm sure there'll be more than one reason, but one for sure will be we, after leading the way on being a magnet for talent, we lost our way and lost our lead.
Well, certainly a common denominator 247 years ago, all immigrants.
Sure.
All immigrants. We got to keep the doors open. We're certainly reliant upon people wanting to come to America, choosing, and so we represent 65 different countries with our workforce of 1,200, which is quite diverse, but 25% are not U.S. citizens yet.
Right.
We have to have pathways just to be able to provide support for future older adults as well,
right,
and that nation. You've been awesome with your time, and it's been enjoyable, at least for me, fast hour. And I know that you welcomed in a new grandchild recently, so congratulations.
Yeah, I need some tips from you folks, because I was just minding my business like 3 years ago. My wife and I had like 0 grandchildren. I was like, okay, my kids were getting older at some point. In the last 3 years, it's gone from 0 to 4. And none of them were in the area. They're like distributed. So, as you all know, it's a great joy, and even in a short period of time, a lot of fun. And luckily we have ability to spend a lot of time with them. But any tips that anybody want to slip on you a piece of paper? I'm in a learning mode here. I did read an article this morning. It was in the Atlantic by Arthur Brooks, a great writer. I just became a grandparent maybe the last month or so, and he wrote some of the observations, including some that were kind of humorous. So if you haven't seen that, you might want to read it.
I feel like maybe your parents are channeling a little bit because you said they had 3 kids really fast.
Well, that's
So-
true.
so
Well,
yeah, you
3 and
had
18
4
months, that
grandchildren.
takes real work.
You had
Particularly
4
when
grandchildren.
when we're twins. There's a little bit of a math problem when you say that. It's like, how did that work?
So as we conclude, just curious of what your biggest hope for them, your grandchildren, is, and any thoughts you have or advice you have for the future generations.
Well, that's, I think it's something about, and many of you have been through this, something about getting a little older now, as I'm turning 65, something about becoming a grandparent that gives you a different perspective. I've been thinking about that. I haven't quite figured it all out. But what I would hope they would do is, obviously I want them to be happy and healthy and productive and find their passion, whatever it might be, and follow that path. With our 5 kids, couldn't be 5 different children, 5 different paths. So, I kind of understand that. But also I hope that they will feel a certain responsibility to contribute and give back in whatever way makes sense. That I think that is important, and hopefully they will figure out how to be, instead of part of the problem, part of the solution, and figure out ways in their own way. Could be big ways, could be small ways. Sometimes my kids criticize me for, you're always thinking too big, like change the world. It's like revolutionize healthcare. Maybe we want to be a little more retail, a little more micro. They're completely right. It's like, maybe my daughter's in medical school, just wants to doctor and see some patients. So I've learned that from them, and I think I should kind of hopefully carry some of that forward with grandchildren. But they obviously are blessed and born and raised, and will be raised in what's a great country, and have opportunities that most people around the world don't have. Certainly in our case, because of having some resources not everybody has, and probably more opportunities and so forth. And hopefully they recognize that with that comes some extra responsibility to make sure just have an impact, and have a little dent in the world that can be a positive dent.
Well, thank you so much for leading by example. I think we're so grateful that you're here with us. Brenda, thank you so much for creating this relationship and bringing Steve to us. Can we give a round of applause?
Thank you all.